Texas, 1881. A time when mercy was scarce and judgment came quick. A desperate widow with nowhere left to turn. No decent woman travels alone. Probably one of those fallen women. Who knows who that child belongs to? History tells us some stories were impossible. That a black rancher couldn't own land. That a white woman couldn't seek his help. That some lines could never be crossed. Mom, you and that child better come inside. Stay until the very end to discover the untold story of courage that challenged every boundary of the American frontier, a truth so controversial that history tried to erase it completely. Before we dive deeper into this powerful story, I need you to do something right now. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Why? Because here at The Black Rancher, we're uncovering the hidden stories of black heroes who shaped the American frontier, stories deliberately buried by those who wrote our history books. If you believe everyone deserves to see themselves in America's great narrative, share this video now. These forgotten tales of courage, dignity, and family deserve to be told. Subscribe now, and let's preserve this legacy together. Now, let's journey back to 1881 Texas, where our story begins. Lonesome Creek, Texas, March 1881. The spring storm lashed against the windows of Isaiah Montgomery's ranch house, the wind howling like a wounded animal across the Texas plains. At 42, Isaiah had weathered many storms, both of nature and of man's making, but tonight felt different. Restless, he sat at his hand-carved oak table, ledger open before him, calculating the winter's losses against spring's promise. Freedom had cost him everything once. Now, 15 years after emancipation, he owned 600 acres of hard-won Texas land. The Triple M Ranch, named for Montgomery, Mississippi in memory, stood as testament to a promise he'd made while still in chains, to build something lasting, something free. A sharp knock cut through the storm's fury. Isaiah's hand instinctively moved toward the Winchester rifle mounted on the wall. Visitors after dark rarely brought good news, especially to a black rancher whose success had bred resentment among certain neighbors. 3 more knocks, desperate and weak. "Who's there?" he called, rifle now firmly in hand as he approached the door. No answer came, just the muffled sound of a baby crying. Isaiah unbolted the heavy door and pulled it open, rain immediately lashing his face. There on his porch stood a young white woman, soaked to the bone, clutching a bundle to her chest. Her face was gaunt with hunger, her eyes hollow with exhaustion. The child in her arms couldn't have been more than 6 months old. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the storm. "They said you might have work. Any work. I can cook, clean, mend." Her voice broke as the baby whimpered against her chest. Isaiah had seen desperation before, had lived it, but the sight before him stirred something deep and forgotten. She was young, maybe 25, with hair the color of wheat and eyes that had clearly seen more sorrow than her years should allow. Her clothes, though drenched, were of decent quality, but worn thin with time and wear. In that moment, Isaiah knew what society expected. A black man should send a white woman on her way, especially one alone with a child. Helping her meant danger. It meant talk. It meant risking everything he'd built. "You walked here? In this?" he asked, glancing at the storm. 3 miles from town." She nodded, swaying slightly. "They wouldn't let me stay at the boarding house once they learned I was alone." The baby began to wail in earnest now, tiny fists pushing against the sodden blanket. Isaiah Montgomery made his decision in that moment, one that would change 3 lives forever. "Ma'am, you and that child better come inside," he said, stepping back from the doorway. "You're home now." She looked up, confusion and disbelief washing across her face. "Sir?" "This storm ain't letting up, and that baby needs warmth and dry clothes." His voice was firm but gentle. "We'll talk about work tomorrow. Tonight, you need rest." As she stepped across his threshold, Isaiah knew the town would talk. But he also knew what it meant to be turned away when hope was all but gone. Some principles stood higher than fear. "I'm Isaiah Montgomery," he said, closing the door against the raging storm. "Sarah," she whispered, relief cracking her voice. "Sarah Winters." And this is James. What neither knew in that moment was how their lives had been on a collision course for years, or how the secrets Sarah carried would soon threaten everything Isaiah had built. By sunrise, the storm had passed, leaving behind a washed-clean sky and mud-slicked roads. Isaiah rose before dawn, as was his habit, careful not to wake his unexpected guests. During the night, he had surrendered his bedroom to Sarah and little James, taking instead the worn leather chair in his study. Sarah Winters slept the deep sleep of the truly exhausted, her son nestled beside her on Isaiah's bed. Before succumbing to sleep, she had managed only a few spoonfuls of stew before her eyes had grown heavy. The journey had clearly taken its toll. Outside, Isaiah's ranch hands were already at work. 3 men, 2 black and 1 Mexican, who had found in Isaiah not just an employer, but a fair one. They worked his land alongside him, sharing in its bounty and building their own futures. Miguel Ortiz approached as Isaiah inspected a fence damaged by the storm. "Heard you have company, patron," Miguel said carefully, his eyes questioning. "News traveled fast, even in a storm." Isaiah nodded. "Woman and her baby needed shelter." Miguel glanced toward the house. "White woman?" "Woman in need," Isaiah corrected, though he understood the concern in his friend's voice. "The town will talk," Miguel warned. "Town always talks," Isaiah replied, hammering a loose fence post with more force than necessary. "Talked when a Negro bought this land. Talked when I hired you. They'll find something new next week." But both men knew this was different. Some boundaries, once crossed, unleashed consequences. Inside the house, Sarah woke to unfamiliar surroundings. For a moment, panic gripped her chest until memory returned. The storm, the imposing figure of Isaiah Montgomery, the blessed relief of warmth and shelter. James still slept beside her, his tiny chest rising and falling with peaceful breaths. She rose quietly, her body aching from weeks of hard travel. The room was simple but comfortable. A solid oak bed frame, a dresser with a mirror, a Bible on the nightstand. On the wall hung a single-frame document that caught her eye, a deed of purchase for the Triple M Ranch, dated 1872. The rest of the house revealed a man of simple tastes but unmistakable pride. Everything was clean, orderly, and well-maintained. In the kitchen she found coffee already brewed and a note in surprisingly elegant handwriting. "Mrs. Winters, please help yourself to breakfast. Will return midday. I.M." By the time Isaiah returned for the noon meal, he found his kitchen transformed. The smell of fresh bread filled the air, the floors gleamed with fresh scrubbing, and Sarah stood at his stove, James balanced on her hip as she stirred a pot of beans. "You didn't need to do all this," Isaiah said, removing his hat as he entered. "I did," she replied simply. "You offered shelter. I offer what I can in return." As they sat to eat, Sarah finally shared pieces of her story. Her husband, a railroad worker, had died in a construction accident 6 months prior, leaving her with nothing but debts and a newborn son. Her husband's family, wealthy Massachusetts merchants who had disowned him for marrying beneath his station, refused to acknowledge her or James. "I heard there was work in Texas," she explained, her eyes fixed on her plate, "that a woman with willing hands could make a living." "And you came to Lonesome Creek?" Isaiah asked. The town was hardly known for its opportunities. A shadow crossed her face. "Not directly. I've been moving, town to town." She hesitated. People aren't always kind to a woman alone. Isaiah understood the unspoken reality. A young widow with a child was vulnerable prey in the harsh world of the frontier. "Well, you've found work if you want it," he said. "The ranch needs a housekeeper. Place for you and the boy to stay." Her head snapped up, eyes wide with disbelief. "You'd hire me? Just like that?" "Saw your work already," he nodded toward the freshly cleaned kitchen. "And I judge people by what they do, not what others say they are." Hope flickered across her face, quickly replaced by wariness. "Mr. Montgomery, you should know what this might mean. People will talk. A white woman living under a black man's roof." "Mrs. Winters," he interrupted gently, "I've been judged every day of my life for things I can't change. I stopped caring what small minds think long ago. What neither said aloud was that her presence posed dangers beyond mere gossip. In Texas, 1881, some would see her employment as an offense worthy of violent retribution. Before Sarah could respond, the sound of approaching horses interrupted their conversation. Through the window, Isaiah spotted Sheriff Caleb Porter and 2 other riders approaching the house. "Stay inside," he told Sarah, his voice suddenly tense. "Keep the baby quiet." As Isaiah stepped onto his porch, Sheriff Porter called out before even dismounting, "Heard you took in some strays last night, Montgomery." Isaiah's face remained impassive. Storm was bad. Offered shelter to a traveler. The sheriff dismounted, spitting tobacco juice onto Isaiah's freshly swept porch. "Traveler, huh? Young woman with a baby, I hear. Traveling alone." "She was seeking work. I had work to offer." The 2 men flanking the sheriff exchanged glances. One was Thomas Hardin, owner of the general store. The other, Richard Blackwood, owned the largest cattle operation in the county and had tried twice to force Isaiah to sell his land. "Montgomery," Blackwood drawled, "you know how things work around here. Some arrangements just ain't natural." Isaiah's hand tensed at his side, but his voice remained level. "Nothing unnatural about providing honest work to someone willing." Sheriff Porter stepped closer. "How we got a duty to protect vulnerable women from situations they might not understand. Why don't you let us take her back to town? Reverend Willis's wife might find her suitable work." "Mrs. Winters makes her own decisions," Isaiah replied, "and she's chosen employment here." Inside, Sarah listened, holding James tight to prevent any noise. She recognized the sheriff's voice. He had been among those who had suggested she try the colored rancher when no one else in town would help her. Had it been a trap all along? "Montgomery," the sheriff's voice hardened, "don't make this difficult. Town council won't stand for this arrangement." "Last I checked, Sheriff, this land is deeded to me. Who I hire is my business." The tension crackled between them until Blackwood broke the silence with a cold laugh. "You always were stubborn, Montgomery. But remember, accidents happen on isolated ranches all the time." As the 3 men mounted their horses to leave, Porter called back, "We'll be watching, Montgomery. One wrong step." The threat hung in the air long after the dust from their horses had settled. When Isaiah returned inside, he found Sarah white-faced but resolute, standing in the kitchen doorway. "I should go," she whispered, though the words clearly pained her. "I won't bring trouble to someone who showed kindness." Isaiah shook his head slowly. "Mrs. Winters, trouble found me long before you arrived." He looked at the child in her arms. "The question is whether you're willing to weather it, because if you stay, there will be more." Sarah straightened her shoulders, something steely emerging in her gaze. "Mr. Montgomery, I've lost my husband, my home, and my reputation. The only thing I have left is my son and my dignity. If you're brave enough to offer us shelter, I'm brave enough to accept it." In that moment, a silent agreement formed between them, one that would be tested severely in the days to come. What neither could know was that Blackwood was already formulating a plan to use Sarah's presence to seize everything Isaiah had built, or that Sarah's past held secrets that would soon come to light, changing everything. This is The Black Rancher, and if you're just now joining us on this journey, hit that subscribe button immediately. Our story of courage, dignity, and defiance is just beginning to unfold. What happens when a community's prejudice collides with one man's sense of justice, when a woman with nothing to lose meets a man who risked everything for freedom? Share this video with someone who appreciates powerful stories of American history. These forgotten chapters deserve to be told. And remember, the truth is always more compelling than fiction. Now let's continue with Chapter 3, where the threats against Isaiah and Sarah escalate to dangerous heights. For 2 weeks, an uneasy routine developed at the Triple M Ranch. Sarah proved herself an excellent housekeeper, cooking, cleaning, and transforming the bachelor's quarters into something resembling a home. Little James thrived under the stable roof, growing plumper and more active by the day. Isaiah's ranch hands, Miguel, Jefferson, and Caleb, initially viewed Sarah with suspicion, but her work ethic and respectful manner soon won them over. She treated the men with the same dignity she showed Isaiah, asking about their families and sending extra food when they worked late. But beyond the ranch's boundaries, pressure mounted. Supplies that Isaiah had ordered from town arrived damaged or not at all. The banker suddenly misplaced records of payments Isaiah had made. Cattle buyers who had done business with him for years suddenly found excuses to look elsewhere. More troubling were the riders who occasionally appeared at the ranch's perimeter, watching from a distance before disappearing. Isaiah took to keeping his Winchester closer at hand, and Miguel began sleeping in the barn rather than his cabin, providing an extra set of eyes. One evening, as Isaiah sat on the porch reviewing cattle ledgers, Sarah joined him, James asleep in her arms. The sunset painted the Texas sky in brilliant oranges and purples, a brief moment of beauty amid growing tension. "They won't stop, will they?" Sarah asked quietly, her eyes on the horizon. Isaiah set his papers aside. "No, ma'am, they won't. Because of me. Because of what we represent," he corrected. "A black man and a white woman under the same roof, even as employer and employee, challenges what they believe about the natural order." Sarah sighed. "I've been thinking of moving on. Not because I want to, but—" "Running won't solve it," Isaiah interrupted gently. "For you or for me. I ran once all the way from Mississippi. Found out trouble follows when people think you don't know your place." The quietness between them was comfortable now, built on mutual respect forged through shared danger. "How did you come to own all this?" Sarah finally asked, gesturing to the expanse of the ranch. "Few men of any color manage what you have." Isaiah rarely spoke of his past, but something about the peaceful evening and Sarah's genuine interest loosened his guard. "I was born a slave in Mississippi," he began. "Montgomery plantation. Master's son taught me to read in secret. Said I had a mind too sharp to waste. When freedom came, I worked 3 years for the railroads, saving every penny. Came to Texas because land was cheap and memories expensive." He paused, remembering. "Bought my first 100 acres in '69. Most folks thought I'd fail within a year. Some tried to make sure of it." Sarah shifted James to her other arm. "But you didn't fail." "No, ma'am. Added land when I could. Built this house with these hands." His voice carried quiet pride. "A man needs something that's his, something that can't be taken." "And can it?" Sarah asked softly. "Be taken?" Isaiah's eyes met hers in the fading light. "They can try." The sound of approaching hoofbeats cut their conversation short. Isaiah was on his feet immediately, rifle in hand, positioning himself between Sarah and the approaching rider. It was Jefferson, one of his ranch hands, riding hard from the direction of town. "Mr. Montgomery," he called, reining his horse to a stop. "Overheard talk at the saloon. Blackwood's men, they're planning something tonight, something about teaching a lesson." Isaiah's expression hardened. "Mrs. Winters, take James inside. Lock the doors. Jefferson, ride to Miguel's cabin and Caleb's. Tell them to arm themselves and watch the north property line." As Sarah hurried inside, Isaiah caught her arm gently. "If anything happens to me, there's money in a lockbox under the floorboards in my study. Enough to get you and James somewhere safe." The fear in her eyes was tempered with something stronger, resolve. "Nothing's going to happen to you. Not if I can help it." Isaiah managed a grim smile. "Get inside now. Whatever you hear, stay there until I come for you." The night grew thick with tension as Isaiah and his men positioned themselves around the ranch house. Hours passed with nothing but the normal sounds of the Texas night until the smell reached them first. Smoke. From the north pasture, orange flames erupted, racing through the dry grass toward the barn and corrals. Isaiah and his men scrambled to release the horses and cattle, driving them toward the creek as the fire spread with terrifying speed. "It's a diversion," Miguel shouted over the chaos. "They want us away from the house." Isaiah's blood ran cold. Sarah and James were alone in the house. Racing back through billowing smoke, Isaiah saw them, 5 riders, masked and armed, surrounding his home. One held a torch, ready to set the structure ablaze. Through the window he caught a glimpse of Sarah, holding his shotgun with trembling hands as James cried behind her. What happened next would become legend in Lonesome Creek for decades to come. Isaiah Montgomery, former slave and rightful owner of the Triple M Ranch, strode directly toward the armed men, Winchester raised. "This ends now," he called, his voice carrying through the night. "You're on my land, threatening my household." The riders wheeled to face him, guns drawn. "Your land?" one mocked, the voice unmistakably Richard Blackwood's despite his mask. "No deed means a thing when you're buried beneath it, boy." "I ain't been a boy since I picked my first cotton," Isaiah replied, his aim steady. "And I didn't fight through hell to freedom to let you take what's mine." The standoff teetered on violence when the front door of the ranch house burst open. Sarah Winters stepped onto the porch, shotgun raised, James strapped to her back in a makeshift carrier. "5 against 1, she called, her voice surprisingly steady. "Those odds seem poor for men who claim to be brave." The riders hesitated, clearly not expecting resistance from the woman they'd come to rescue. "Mrs. Winters," Blackwood called, "this isn't your fight. We're here to take you back to decent society." Sarah's laugh was bitter. "Decent society? The same one that left my baby and me to starve. The one that offers protection with one hand while the other lights fires and threatens murder." She stepped forward, shotgun unwavering. "I know your voice, Mr. Blackwood. Does your wife know you're out terrorizing honest folk tonight?" The tension stretched taut until one of the riders nervously fired a shot into the air. The sound spooked Blackwood's horse, which reared suddenly, throwing him to the ground. His mask dislodged, revealing his face. In the confusion, Miguel and the other ranch hands emerged from the smoke, rifles ready, surrounding the would-be attackers. "Leave now," Isaiah commanded, "and there needn't be bloodshed tonight." Blackwood scrambled to his feet, dignity shattered, rage in his eyes. "This isn't over, Montgomery. Not by a long shot." As the riders retreated into the night, Sarah lowered her shotgun, her hands finally beginning to shake with delayed fear. Isaiah approached slowly, concern etched on his face. "You and James should have stayed inside," he said softly. Sarah shook her head, tears beginning to flow. "They would have killed you, 5 against 1. You put yourself and your son in danger." "No," she whispered. "I stood with the one person who stood for us when no one else would." As they surveyed the damage, burned pasture, scattered cattle, the acrid smell of smoke clinging to everything, a new understanding passed between them. Whatever came next, they would face it together. What they couldn't know was that Richard Blackwood's humiliation would drive him to desperate measures, or that Sarah's mysterious past was about to catch up with them in ways neither could imagine. The fire at Triple M Ranch made news throughout the county. Though no witnesses would come forward, everyone knew who was responsible. What surprised the townsfolk, however, was Sheriff Porter's unexpected visit to the ranch the following day, not to investigate the attack, but to issue a warning. "Blackwood's filed a formal complaint," Porter informed Isaiah, deliberately avoiding Sarah's gaze as she stood in the doorway. "Claims you're harboring a fugitive." Isaiah's expression remained neutral. "Mrs. Winters is my employed housekeeper, not a fugitive." Porter shifted uncomfortably. "That's just it, Montgomery. According to Blackwood, she ain't Mrs. Winters at all." He turned to Sarah, whose face had drained of color. "He says your real name is Sarah Blackwood." Richard's brother's widow. The silence that followed was deafening. "Is it true?" Isaiah finally asked, his voice carefully controlled. Sarah's hands trembled as she clutched James closer. "My husband's name was Jonathan Winters," she insisted, though her voice wavered. Porter pulled a folded paper from his vest. "Telegraph came from Boston yesterday. Jonathan Blackwood, wealthy merchant family, married a Sarah Collins 3 years ago. Family disowned him. He took his mother's maiden name, Winters, died in a railroad accident 6 months back, leaving a widow and infant son." Sarah's shoulders sagged, tears welling in her eyes. "I never lied about who I am," she whispered. "Only his family name. We were Winters, not Blackwood. That's how we lived. That's how Jonathan died." Understanding dawned on Isaiah's face. "Richard Blackwood is your brother-in-law." Sarah nodded miserably. "Jonathan was his younger brother. They hadn't spoken in years, not since Jonathan married me. A shopkeeper's daughter. Beneath their station, they said." Porter folded the paper, his expression grim. Blackwood claims, as his brother's only male relative, he has legal right to guardianship of the child, his nephew. Says you fled Boston with the boy illegally. No, Sarah cried, backing away. Jonathan never wanted his family near our son. They rejected him in life. They have no claim in death. Isaiah stepped forward. What exactly does Blackwood want, Sheriff? Says he'll drop all charges if the boy is surrendered to his custody, Porter replied. Sarah can stay on as the child's nurse in his household. The cruelty of the offer was clear, separating mother and child while keeping Sarah under Blackwood's control. And if she refuses, Isaiah asked, though he already knew the answer. Then he presses charges for kidnapping, and you, Porter looked directly at Isaiah, for aiding a fugitive. After the sheriff departed, Sarah collapsed into a chair. James clutched tightly to her chest. I should have told you everything, she whispered. I never thought he would find us, never thought he would care enough to look. Isaiah sat across from her. It's not about caring, he said quietly. It's about control. And now, it's about me too. Sarah looked up, realization dawning. Your ranch. If Richard can have you arrested. Isaiah nodded. With me in jail, Blackwood could finally take Triple M. 2 birds, 1 stone. I'll go, Sarah said suddenly, her voice breaking. I'll take James and leave tonight. He'll have no reason to pursue you then. And go where? Isaiah asked gently. He's found you once. He'll find you again. He leaned forward, his gaze intense. Unless you're planning to leave James behind. The horror on her face was answer enough. Never. Then we fight, Isaiah said simply. Together. Over the next days, they prepared for the legal battle ahead. Isaiah rode to the neighboring county to consult a lawyer, one who owed him a favor and wouldn't be under Blackwood's influence. Sarah wrote a detailed account of her marriage, Jonathan's estrangement from his family, and his explicit wishes that his son be raised away from his brother's influence. The lawyer confirmed their fears. The law typically favored blood relatives, especially wealthy, well-connected ones, over widowed mothers with no resources. A white woman choosing to live and work on a black man's ranch would only damage her case further. There's one option, Isaiah said as they sat at the kitchen table that night, legal papers spread between them. It's not one you'll like. Sarah looked up, exhaustion etched in every line of her face. Tell me. Marriage, he said simply. As your husband, I would have legal standing as James's stepfather. Blackwood would have a much harder time claiming guardianship over the objections of a mother and her husband. Sarah stared at him, speechless. It would be a marriage on paper only, Isaiah continued quickly. To protect you and James legally, nothing would change in our daily arrangements. Except everything, Sarah whispered. A white woman marrying a black man in Texas, 1881. They'd lynch you, Isaiah. They'd take James anyway, and they'd hang you from the nearest tree. The use of his first name, the first time she had ever spoken it, hung between them. Maybe, he acknowledged, but at least then we'd know we fought with every weapon we had. Sarah rose from the table, walking to the window to look out at the Texas night. Why would you risk so much? For us? Isaiah was silent for a long moment. Because 42 years ago, my mother had no one to stand for her when the master sold me away. Because freedom means nothing if we don't use it to protect those who need protection. He joined her at the window, careful to maintain a respectful distance. And because I've watched you these past weeks, your courage, your dignity, your love for your son, some things are worth the risk. Sarah turned to him, tears streaming down her face. I won't be the cause of your destruction. Then we'll find another way, he promised. Together. The solution, when it came, arrived from an unexpected source. 2 days later, Miguel returned from town with news. A witness had come forward, claiming to have seen Blackwood and his men setting the fire at Triple M Ranch. The witness was none other than Reverend Willis, the most respected man in the county. Reverend says he was returning from a sick call, Miguel reported excitedly, saw the whole thing from the North Ridge Road, went straight to the circuit judge, not the sheriff. The Reverend's testimony changed everything. Blackwood found himself facing charges rather than pressing them. The circuit judge, who answered to no one in Lonesome Creek, issued a temporary order protecting Sarah's custody of James until a formal hearing could be held. But the most surprising development came when Sarah received a packet of letters delivered by Reverend Willis himself. "These were among your husband's effects," the Reverend explained. "Sent from Boston to the railroad company, then forwarded here when I made inquiries." The letters, written by Jonathan Winters to his wife during his final weeks working on the railroad, contained explicit instructions about his brother. "Under no circumstances should Richard have any influence over our son. He embodies everything I left Boston to escape: greed, cruelty, and the belief that money justifies any action." The most damning letter contained Jonathan's account of Richard's business dealings, including fraud, bribery of officials, and even an incident where a competitor's business mysteriously burned to the ground. "Why are you helping us?" Isaiah asked the Reverend before he departed. The older man's eyes were tired but kind. "Because I've watched this town's treatment of you for years, Mr. Montgomery. Watched and said nothing. There comes a point where silence becomes complicity." He glanced at Sarah holding James in the doorway. "And perhaps because 40 years ago my own mother faced a choice not unlike Mrs. Winters. She chose courage. I've tried to honor that choice." With Blackwood's credibility shattered and legal attention turning to his own misdeeds, the threat to Sarah and James diminished. But the underlying reality remained unchanged. A white woman and her child, living under a black man's roof, continued to violate the town's unwritten codes. The evening after the Reverend's visit, Isaiah found Sarah on the porch, watching the sunset with James asleep in her arms. "We've won a reprieve," she said quietly. "Not a victory." Isaiah nodded, leaning against the porch railing. "Blackwood will retreat, but not forever, and others will take up his cause, in time." "What happens now?" she asked, the question encompassing far more than their legal situation. Isaiah looked out over his land, the land he had worked, bled for, built into something to be proud of. "That depends on what you want, Sarah." "I want my son to grow up safe," she said immediately. "I want him to know dignity and fairness and hard work." She paused, gathering courage. "And I want to stay here, where for the first time since Jonathan died, I've found purpose and respect. People will never accept—" "I'm not asking them to," she interrupted. "I'm only asking if you want us to stay, as your housekeeper, as whatever role makes sense for the ranch." Isaiah turned to her, his expression more open than she had ever seen it. "The role that makes sense is the one that brings you peace. If that's here, then here is where you belong." As the Texas sunset painted the sky in brilliant colors, Sarah Winters made a decision that would scandalize Lonesome Creek for decades to come. She reached out and took Isaiah Montgomery's weathered hand in her own. "Then we face whatever comes," she said simply. Together. Lonesome Creek, Texas, spring 1889. The Triple M Ranch looked different now. The original house stood at its center, but additional rooms had been added over the years. A kitchen garden flourished, where once there had been only dusty yard. The barn had been rebuilt, larger than before, and the herd of cattle grazing the surrounding pastures had tripled in size. Most noticeable, however, was the sound of children's laughter. 8-year-old James raced across the yard, pursued by his 6-year-old sister, Grace. Behind them toddled 4-year-old David, determined to keep up with his older siblings. On the porch, Sarah Montgomery watched them, a hand resting unconsciously on her swollen belly where their 4th child grew. At her side stood Isaiah, now streaked with gray at the temples, but standing as tall and proud as the day she'd first arrived at his door. "They're coming for supper tonight," Sarah confirmed, glancing at her husband. Isaiah nodded. "Miguel and Lucia, Jefferson and his new bride, Caleb and his boys, Reverend and Mrs. Willis too." The extended family of the Triple M Ranch had grown over the years. Miguel Ortiz now managed his own portion of the property in partnership with Isaiah. Jefferson had saved enough to bring his fiancée from New Orleans. The ranch had become a community of its own, diverse, hard-working, and fiercely loyal to one another. The town of Lonesome Creek had changed too, though more slowly. The scandal of Isaiah and Sarah's marriage in 1883, performed by Reverend Willis in defiance of social convention, had gradually given way to grudging acceptance. Not approval, never that, but a recognition that the Montgomery family could not be driven out or broken apart. Richard Blackwood had left Texas after his business dealings came under scrutiny, returning to Boston in disgrace. The ranch he'd coveted now thrived under Isaiah's careful management. "Daddy," James called, running toward them, "can I show David how to ride Thunder tomorrow?" Isaiah smiled at his stepson, though neither he nor James ever used that term. To James, Isaiah was simply Daddy, the only father he had ever known. "Thunder's still too big for your brother," Isaiah replied, "but we'll find him a gentle pony when the time's right." The boy's features, fair like his mother's but with expressions increasingly similar to Isaiah's, lit up with excitement. "I'll help train him just like you showed me." As James ran back to his siblings, Sarah leaned against her husband's shoulder. "He grows more like you every day," she murmured. "He has your spirit," Isaiah replied, his arm encircling her waist. Their marriage had never been easy. Beyond the town's initial outrage, there had been practical challenges, legal barriers, banking difficulties, the constant need to prove themselves above reproach. They had faced threats, boycotts, and periods where armed men had to guard the property day and night. Yet somehow they had endured. Their union, begun as a practical arrangement to protect James, had gradually transformed into something neither had expected to find: a deep and abiding love, built on shared struggles and mutual respect. "Do you ever regret it?" Sarah asked quietly, watching their children play in the yard. It was a question she rarely voiced, though it sometimes haunted her late at night. "Everything you've had to face because of us." Isaiah's hand tightened around hers. "Not for a single moment," he replied without hesitation. "Every struggle made us stronger. Every challenge proved what I've always known, that love defies boundaries men create." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the ranch, the sound of approaching wagons announced their dinner guests. The Montgomery home had become a gathering place, an island of acceptance in a world still struggling with change. Miguel arrived first with his wife Lucia and their 3 children. Jefferson came next with his new bride Maria, still shy but smiling. Caleb brought his 2 boys, motherless since last winter's fever, but finding a second home at Triple M. Last came Reverend Willis and his wife, now elderly but still committed to their quiet revolution of compassion. As they gathered around the long table Isaiah had built when Grace was born, the Reverend offered a blessing that acknowledged the journey that had brought them all together. For this family, formed not by custom but by courage, for this community, built not on sameness but on respect, for this bounty harvested from land once barren until love and labor made it bloom, we give thanks. The meal was filled with conversation, laughter, and plans for the future. James proudly announced his intention to attend school in Austin when he was older, to study law, so nobody can twist rules against families like ours again. Grace, already showing her mother's determination, declared she would help run the ranch, just like Daddy. Little David simply watched it all with wide eyes, secure in the love that surrounded him. After the guests departed and the children were tucked into bed, Isaiah and Sarah sat on the porch as they had so many nights before. The Texas stars spread above them in a glittering canopy, bearing witness to the unlikely path their lives had taken. "I received a letter from Boston today," Sarah said quietly. "From Jonathan's mother, James's grandmother." Isaiah turned to her, surprised. "After all this time?" Sarah nodded. "Richard has died. Apparently his financial schemes finally caught up with him." She hesitated. "She wants to meet James. Says he's her only remaining link to her younger son." "How do you feel about that?" Isaiah asked, his voice gentle. 8 years ago I would have refused outright," Sarah admitted. "But now," her hand drifted to her belly. "Our children should know their heritage, all of it. The pain and the joy, the mistakes and the triumphs." She looked up at him. "What do you think?" Isaiah considered this carefully. "I think a boy should know where he comes from, to better understand where he might go." He smiled slightly. And I think we've faced harder challenges than an elderly woman from Boston. Sarah laughed softly, the sound still capable of warming Isaiah's heart after all these years. That we have. As they sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars, Isaiah reflected on the journey that had begun with a desperate knock on his door. How could he have known that the rain-soaked woman and her infant would transform not just his life, but the very meaning of family in this corner of Texas? The ranch around them stood as testament to a simple truth, that bonds formed by choice and forged through adversity proved stronger than those dictated by convention. The Triple M Ranch had become more than a parcel of land. It was living proof that courage, when met with compassion, could create something revolutionary. "You know," Sarah said, breaking the silence, "when I came here that night, I had nothing left but hope. I was looking for work, for shelter." She turned to him, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "I never imagined I'd find a home." Isaiah's weathered hand found hers in the darkness. "That night when I opened my door, I was a man with land but no legacy, no future beyond my own lifetime." His voice deepened with emotion. "You didn't just find a home, Sarah. You helped me build one." In the distance, a coyote called into the night, its voice echoing across the Texas plains. The sound carried across the ranch, the Triple M Ranch, where a former slave and a desperate widow had defied history to write their own story. A story that would be told in whispers and in wonder for generations to come. If this story moved you, don't keep it to yourself. Hit that subscribe button right now and join the thousands who are discovering the hidden history of the American frontier with The Black Rancher. These are the stories that shaped our nation, the courage of ordinary people who defied extraordinary odds to create a better world. Your subscription doesn't just support this channel. It helps ensure these powerful narratives reach those who need to hear them most. Leave a comment below sharing what part of Isaiah and Sarah's journey resonated with you the most. Thank you for joining me on this journey back to 1881 Texas, where one knock on a door changed everything. Remember, history isn't just what's written in textbooks. It's the untold stories of courage that truly shaped our world. Until next time, this is The Black Rancher, preserving our legacy one story at a time.